strategies. So we've got an amazing panel of people here who are immersed in the industry. So let's kick it off by starting at the end. Titus, would you like to introduce yourself, tell us what you do, and how do you fit into the industry here?
There's a question? Okay. Do we have sound? Okay, I'll keep talking. Titus Bicknell. I've been running SVODs for about a decade, starting with AMC 5 years ago. They bought a company I was with, RLG Entertainment, where we started Acorn TV. And we've been pioneering the niche SVOD space ever since. And I recently departed AMC and I'm out on my own.
Great, Stewart.
Yeah. Hi, everyone. My name is Stewart Frey. I'm a data and technology leader. I've been in the media space for about 25 years. I've had the real fortune of working on a lot and being accountable for a lot of change management, from everything from moving tape to file-based. And then recently I was at WWE, where we launched our own OTT platform, the WWE Network, which was one of the first ones in the market. And then had a great opportunity to be part of the transition where we went distribution, and in 2020 we moved on to the Peacock platform. So I'm happy to be here and talk with you.
And Matt D.
Hey everyone, I'm Matt Dominguez. I am the Director of Streaming Distribution and Partnerships for Cox Media Group. For those who don't know Cox Media Group, we're the leader in the local media space. We have TV stations in 9 markets and radio in 10. In my role for Cox Media Group, I oversee our third-party distribution for all the FAST services. So that includes your Pluto TVs, Local Now, Samsung TV Plus, as well as our app distribution on the owned and operated side. So working with Roku, Samsung Tizen, Vizio SmartCast, those worlds. And I also oversee some of our content acquisitions to help bring more life to our FAST channels and to our apps. Prior to Cox Media Group, I was at Fuse Media, and prior to that, I was at Food Network. And yeah, looking forward to being here. John, thanks for having me again.
My pleasure. And Matt R.
Hello, everyone. I'm Matt. I'm the Managing Director of Digital Eye. Digital Eye is a UK-based company. We're based out of Bristol on the west side of the UK. If you haven't been to Bristol, I would recommend, of course. I'm also the only one that didn't seem to get the Suits memo, but you know. So the Digital Eye is a company. We have panels across 20 countries, and we passively collect SVOD data, particularly across major global players, across Netflix, Prime Video, HBO Max, Amazon, and Disney Plus. And we passively collect data across panels in 20 countries. So we have a really unique perspective on viewer behavior and viewer data, specifically around what brings people into panels, what stops people from canceling their subscription to panels as well. So hopefully I can bring a bit of that, and I'm really happy to be here on this great panel as well.
Great. And I'm Jonathan Hurd, a partner with Altman Solon. We're a strategy consulting firm focused totally on technology, media, and telecom. And we have about 600 people around the world in 13 offices. And I work with streaming services on their content pricing and bundling strategy. So let's kick it off. Since we're talking about churn, that revolves around consumer loyalty to your services. So what are some examples of targeting consumers and giving them the content they want that helps make your user base, your customer base loyal? So Titus, could you give us some good examples there?
Certainly. I think one of the things that's useful when looking at the streaming space is that it is effectively like any other direct-to-consumer product space. And so a lot of what we looked at as we launched Acorn TV was the behavior of customers buying other sorts of consumer products. And essentially the dichotomy there is to say, do you have a product that makes more sense in a supermarket? So you might be a brand that says, I sell this thing and I'm going to be in the same aisle as all the other people who sell this thing, but the customer knows exactly where to find that thing, be it toothpaste or whatever the product is. Or does your brand stand alone and is recognized as a brand so you can be in a department store where people come to your booth and you might sell a dozen products, but they've come to your brand because they know your brand. And because you have much more curation of that, the customer is higher value if they've come to you by brand, but you've got a much larger opportunity of footfall if you're in the supermarket model. And I think that's been a useful analogy to take into the streaming space. Franchise loyalty versus brand loyalty is exactly the same thing. Do I go and watch The Walking Dead because it's an AMCN show? Or do I watch it because I'm passionate about the Walking Dead franchise? And if it's about the franchise, then actually as distributors of content, we need to recognize that we need you in the supermarket. We need to find you there, but then we need to help educate you that we sell other things that you might like. And then we might bring you back to our booth, that is to say, our curated space, either in a direct-to-consumer environment, the department store model. And then you start recognizing that as a super brand, we collect together lots of the sorts of products, franchises that you're interested in.
Right. And Matt, you have, Matt D., you have a number of different consumers you're targeting. What are the value propositions for those consumers, and how do you deliver on those value propositions?
Yeah, absolutely. We want to try to meet our viewers where they are, and that, that's where it includes the owned and operated apps that we have, where somebody can come in and download to get their local news. We have 8 currently, and then also there's the third-party space. So that can include the news-centric apps, where obviously it's a great fit. So that would include your Amazon News app, your Haystack News, News On, Local Now, and then there's also the other side of it, the more broad third-party, fast aggregator platforms like your Pluto TVs, Samsung TV Plus, Vizios, and those have crime categories, food categories, travel, everything like that. And those were ones that have kind of come into play in the last couple of years as they've added local news to their offering.
And Stewart, we've been talking about in the prep sessions about some of the missed opportunities around brands and value propositions. And what have you seen in your experience around brands that resonate with a specific value proposition and a consumer base that you can target versus ones that may have lost their way, over the years?
Absolutely. So I can give you a great example with WWE. So like I mentioned before, we had our own OTT platform, still available internationally for now, but it was pretty big in the United States. It was called the WWE Network. And then in 2020, we sold our domestic US rights to NBCU Peacock. And WWE is a strong brand, right? I mean, I'm sure I sit down and talk to a lot of people, and they always, whenever you say you worked for WWE, they always tell you their story of how they, back in the day, how they followed this wrestler. But it was important for the brand itself on the platform to maintain when you're watching that content, you're in that brand. And if you go to Peacock, you'll see we have a tab there, and it's WWE. You click it, and then you enter the WWE experience, right? And what you see, you don't see that everywhere. I was mentioning where we took at Max, and I go on to Max as a platform. I'm not calling it out, but it was very important for WWE to maintain the brand, and because that's where people go to. And if the content was just mixed in with everything else, and there wasn't that brand, then our fans would not know where to find it. It would be much harder to find it, and then we wouldn't be able to leverage them, go to shows and to market to them for other things as well.
And we need to acquire customers at the front end of any of these services before they churn away from us. But what have you seen in terms of strategies with content or value propositions that can drive acquisition of new consumers?
Well, I think we were talking about similar things here in terms of if you've got a brand or an IP that can drive people in. Obviously, we come from the perspective of the biggest global players. And we understand some of the biggest acquisition drivers from content. So if you think about someone like a Disney Plus, when Disney Plus launched a few years ago, they launched with really aggressive IP, right? They launched with IP from Star Wars and other areas like this, and that drove one of the fastest increase in subscribers that we've ever seen, really, in terms of they were right up with some of the more long-standing subscription services out there. So that's a perfect example of how they can drive that. Of course, over time now it's starting to change. Our focus is, of course, the global services, the services that are perhaps a little bit more mature, and that strategy is starting to shift. It's starting to shift from an acquisition strategy specifically for these players into a retention strategy, and then how you can monetize those retained subscribers a bit more as well.
So the Disney Plus example is interesting because it was very clear at the outset what the brands were that underpinned the overall service. And when you look at some other streaming services today, it's less clear what the underlying content is. And consumers, they may find content they're interested in anywhere potentially. It's not necessarily obvious where to go to find content. There aren't those underlying brands that often existed in the linear world where there were channels. And you knew that if you went to this channel, you would see a content on an ongoing basis. What examples have you seen there where that, delineation of that content into those brands? I think maybe fast channels is one of those examples, right?
Yeah, and I think that there's, an important distinction between, a fast channel and AVOD. And just so everyone, if you don't know what a fast channel is, it stands for free ad-supported streaming TV. And it's different from AVOD, where AVOD is your traditional kind of on-demand experience where you scroll through and find what you want and play it. Whereas fast is more of your traditional linear TV experience with, the EPG and 24/7 schedule, where you watch content all of the time. And what's great about the fast channel experience for a programmer is that people can just go in and set it and forget it. And that leads to great retention, more watch time. Whereas on the AVOD side of things, you sometimes have to worry about that endless scroll where you spend more time trying to pick something. You spend more time trying to find something to watch than you actually spend watching. So fast definitely helps, break through some of that a little bit. And then also, even from the advertiser perspective, sure, both of these are free and ad supported, but advertisers are definitely starting to see more and more value in fast. And as over the last couple of years, you've seen more ad dollars going into it. And I think by 2027, they're projecting it's going to be a $12 billion business. So it just keeps on growing.
In terms of targeting consumers and giving them more of what they want and finding those cohorts of consumers, Stewart, I know you've done some work in that space around finding cohorts of consumers and what they're interested in. Can you give some examples there?
Absolutely. I mean, that's when we talk about churn prevention, we were doing a lot of research, and obviously we want to retain subscribers. One of our big challenges is that every month or so we have a big tentpole event, and the tentpole event is sort of like a Super Bowl, World Series. It's a big event where everybody comes together, the tempo goes up, and then when it's over, the tempo goes down. And we wanted to ensure that when the tentpole event that would happen every 4 to 6 weeks, that people weren't starting to churn. They would leave right after the tentpole event. And just to step back for a second, because one of the keys to all this was data. And when we launched the OTT channel, our mandate was to make sure that we were collecting data. We had a whole strategy around building a whole data lake and warehouse for it, but then also building governance around it as well. And because we had the governance, data was being tagged as it was going in, our content was being tagged, we built models around it. We started using that to look and see where customer journeys were. And then we were able to create cohorts. And to give you just a couple examples, we had a cohort of people who like to watch the older content. And we were able to we can see patterns that these people were, these group people were following the similar patterns. They were watching this group of genres, especially around, looking at wrestling from 10, 20 years ago. So we would then, our programmers on the channel would then build rails, those things you see, for them. So that way when they would go in there, and our plan was, eventually it would be dynamic, but we would see these people going in there and those rails would be at the top. So that way they would go in there, we retain them. Even after that tentpole event, there'll be a lot of content for them to find. And then we also had people who were more interested in the newer stuff, catching up on Raw and SmackDown episodes that just happened. So again, we worked on programming that and building experiences for them, with the idea being that eventually, through AI and recommendation engines, it'll all be more dynamic, but really starting to gear that so that way we can prevent the churn. So people wouldn't sign up for a 7-day free trial, go in, watch that big show, and then leave. But instead, they would watch the 7-day free trial, maybe stay a little bit, we'd gather data about them, what they liked, what they didn't like, and then we'd gear them into that cohort.
Great. So what a great example. And when you're thinking about churn, and clearly one reason people churn is they may not see that content that they most want to
Absolutely.
see or may not be able to find it.
They don't even
what-
know it's there.
Yeah, exactly. And what have you seen, for everybody here, in terms of what are the things that cause churn? I mean, that's clearly one, but what are some of the other things, ranging from changes in price to content that you didn't expect that you might see and you're thinking, hey, why am I seeing this? Or, what have you seen from the data that you've analyzed?
Yeah, we've seen some interesting things that have caused people to change the way in which they behave, but also obviously churn as well as part of that. I think generally speaking, we track some of the biggest global players, and they have very different relationships with churn. And Netflix, for example, has a much lower level of churn, and that's completely related to the frequency in which people watch, how many days they go in, how many days they watch that service, how many times they watch something, how many different shows that they dig out and they find. So it's not necessarily, I think, just about how discoverable the content is. It's just where you sit in the journey of a viewer. Are you in the first point of decision making? Are you the first place of call, or are you second or third or fourth? And that has a huge impact on, generally speaking, what the amount of viewing that you can achieve, and also the impact that has on the retaining of those subscribers. But then these services are also starting to kind of change things at a service level. If you think about Netflix more recently, they've actually cracked down on people being able to share their accounts and their passwords. And that, for I think a lot of OTT and video on demand services, is actually a value add. Being able to do that, I think at this point in time, is actually driving value. And we've seen places like Spain and Italy, until they had done that, we'd seen 40% of accounts were shared amongst multiple households. So that's clearly a subscription value drive there. When they then change that, it causes churn, but it also causes new subscriptions as well. And they're in perhaps a slightly unique, they're in a unique place, in terms of being able to kind of take that risk. And I think for other companies that are looking, or other VOD platforms, OTT platforms that are looking to try and adopt similar things, they need to understand whether or not are they going to be able to replace what they lose with what they gain ultimately at the end of that.
Right. So for those who stay, do you see, after the new plans have been put in place, or you make it harder to share, right? For those people that they retain after that initial churn, do they become more loyal? In other words, does the churn go down for those that are sticking around?
I think they obviously see the value in that. The data that we've seen suggests that people there is a set of people for whom are being basically told that they can no longer share that account. So they've been told they can't do that. And so there are a group of those that churn, but there are a group of those that downgrade as well. Mm-hmm. Because when you're in a premium tier, you can subscribe to you can watch 4 simultaneous streams at the same time. So you can have multiple households, if you really want to, watching that stuff at the same time, watching that content at the same time. And when that leaves, that's a specific area of value that you give to that specific platform. And what we've seen actually is that we have a reasonable size of people that are dropping down, but they're not dropping down into a tier in which it's an advertising tier. So if you think about a Netflix, for example, existing subscribers are not dropping into an ad tier, they're dropping into a lower tier without ads.
So something like going from 4K to 2K, in that type of a...
They're going from 4K, I'm not sure entirely in terms of what value specifically, it's hard to pinpoint, but from a household sharing perspective, I would assume the multiple streams, the simultaneous streams, is more of a important factor than the resolution. But what we see is people moving down into a standard tier without ads. So you've got a group of people who are willing, they want to continue to watch Netflix or any of this content. They've bought into the concept of the fact that they don't have to watch that with ads. Where ads is driving the value is new subscribers. 50% of new subscribers into Netflix are advertising tier subscribers. So that's where it's bringing that subscriber growth that we've seen in Q4 where they recorded record numbers for their subscription growth.
Right. What have the rest of you seen in terms of the drivers of churn, and to what extent can you predict churn in advance, running propensity models and that type of thing? And what can you do about it when you've got that data? Are there save desks? Are there win backs? Or what have you seen that works in terms of either reducing churn before it happens or recovering your subscriber base after they've churned?
So I think it really depends on what your strategy is. If you're a DTC or if you are selling your distribution rights, right? And we have seen, I can give you both examples. We have seen on the DTC side it's important to have a tight integration with your marketing team, obviously, and to have a good CRM, and to be tracking your customers and to understand when they churn out, and then to start gearing email campaigns to them and other strategies to get them back. And sometimes that involves promo codes. And I've seen and read, sometimes they're successful, sometimes they're not. Sometimes they come in for the promo code, then they leave again. And then you want to get into that death spiral where you don't constantly try to give out promo codes, and then they just keep churning out. So a lot of it's a balance, and a lot of it's around, again, it goes back to just knowing your customers and capturing that data and making sure you're working closely with your marketing departments and your customer departments as well. I think on the distribution side, it gets a little more challenging because you are now selling your brand to someone else, and the best thing is to have a good strategic partnership with them, and working with those brands, the people who are actually distributing it, having that partnership, and knowing that they now have skin in the game too, because they want to market your content because that brings subscribers to them. But then also building, working with them potentially to build out clean rooms and other things that you can do to get so they can share data with you on people, who's churned. You can share any data you know about those folks as well. Privacy, through all the privacy issues, taking those into account, and then helping you with them market to those customers as well to get them back onto your partner's platform.
Might add that the landscape for those streaming services that are tied to linear TV organizations has a slightly different set of challenges. In that, the model for TV is still that you premiere a new season in the fall. If you're lucky, you split it into two parts and you do pre-end of year and post-end of year, but you're always looking at an off season. And so I think there's a lot of learnings that the linear TV space is getting from sports, where, okay, do you just try and make your money in half the year, or is there something that you can do in the off season? One of the things that I think was interesting for us at AMC was obviously the most recent seasons of The Walking Dead were on AMC Plus, but were also on AMC Linear. The question was, if you were trying to add a new customer who hadn't ever seen The Walking Dead or might have been familiar with this incredible franchise just by association, but had never watched it, you couldn't watch it from the beginning with us. We didn't have the rights. So the question then becomes, do you feel confident enough about the franchise value that you'll send that customer to Netflix to watch seasons 1 through 7, to know that they're going to get so invested in those characters that when they get to 7, they'll come and become your subscriber to watch 8 through 12? That is an enormously challenging question, because on the face of it, it looks like you're sending your customer to somebody else. But I think to my point at the very beginning about the franchise value, it's not an AMC show, so I can't watch it all at AMC. But The Walking Dead as a franchise has such value, you should have that confidence to let them go somewhere else and then come back.
One of the things you brought up, Titus, excuse me, in our prep session was, speaking of churn, the issue of fraud with credit cards. I had never really thought about that, but yeah, tell us about that and how that affects churn.
Sure. So I'm sure you've all had an advert for a service called Rocket Money, I think they're called. essentially systems that will look at your credit card and flag to you things that you've been paying for that you perhaps had forgotten you were paying for them. And what it's done, unfortunately, is people go, oh, you're right, I haven't used that service in 3 months. When you press unsubscribe in those environments, it doesn't gracefully come to us and unsubscribe you. It just marks your credit card payment as a fraud. And what we're also seeing is that there are cohorts of society who don't think there's anything wrong with doing that. Tend to be younger, I'm not sure why. And so what we wrestled with as a direct-to-consumer organization was, okay, we build churn into our model. But if you go into our system and cancel, which we make very easy to do, it's one click, you don't have to call, you don't have to argue with us about it, we just lose your ongoing revenue. If you mark your credit card charge as a fraud, we pay a fine. We have to give you your money back, obviously. But also, we then get in bad standing with the credit card companies who also fine us. And so the loss of a $4.99 or $5.99 customer simply because they chose to say the charge was fraudulent rather than clicking unsubscribe is multiples of that fee. And so building a churn model that allows for that or takes that into consideration is a very big headache for people in the direct-to-consumer business.
Yeah, that's, I just saw people writing it down. What are the things I shouldn't be paying for, right? So let's talk about things that reduce churn. So one example is annual pricing, giving people a discount if you subscribe on an annual basis. What are some of the other things? Oh, here's another one. Putting accounts on hold or letting people put accounts on hold, like you used to be able to do in the cable industry where, oh, I'm going to be away for the summer, turn it off. Well, now you're taking your subscription with you, but still there might be an opportunity rather than losing them totally, just put it on hold until, I don't know, the next half of the, Yellowstone or something comes up, right? So anyway, what are some tricks of the trade that you've all seen used in terms of either pricing strategy or putting accounts on hold or whatever? Any examples there?
If I may. So I think that the challenge with suspensions or annuals is that the intent to churn is there regardless of how you're paying for something. And what it tends to do is simply mean that you stack all the churn up at one point. Now, in light of what I said about fraudulent charge issues for organizations, yes, I would rather bill you once a year, take that hit once a year, and then financially when you decide not to renew by saying that the charge was fraudulent, it's a smaller hit against my transaction numbers. But you're not actually reducing churn, you're delaying it. And I think part of the challenge with that is for businesses is that they are almost always complementing a direct-to-consumer product with a service that's on one of the big channels partners, Amazon, Roku, Apple. And all of those partners have some day of the year when they want to run a discount, be it Cyber Monday, Black Thursday, Yellow Wednesday, whatever it is. And what you find then is that you've created an enormous cohort on a discounted rate who will all churn 365 days later. So your average for the year might be wonderful, maybe even single-digit churn. You're all patting yourselves on the back. You're looking at fantastic ARPU and lifetime value. And then you hit a cliff. And the cliff is almost always in Q4 because of the way those partner organizations want to run their businesses. And so you suddenly find yourself in an embarrassing earnings calling where everything you said at the end of Q3 didn't materialize in the last 3 months of the year and you have no time to make up for it. So, long-winded way of saying, I think organizations objectively should not try and put more distance between the churn events because that doesn't actually reduce your churn.
Matt, one of the things that we talked about is using different windowing strategies as a way of either acquiring or retaining customers. What have you seen that works there?
Quite a bit really. I think the release of content in terms of how it can reduce churn how it can have its impact on the engagement a individual has or an account has with a piece of content is really interesting. So I think there are two sort of clear strategies, and then I think there is a kind of bunch of other different strategies as well. So you've got a kind of binge strategy, right, where you're just dropping everything at the same time. That's fantastic when it comes to getting people engaged with a piece of content, hooking people in. Because we're in a kind of situation at the moment where if you watch episode 1, you can't, you want to watch episode 2 straight away, right? You want to go straight into that second episode. And we can look at 2 pieces of content that critically achieve, similar sorts of levels, but one's dropped weekly, one's dropped in a kind of one binge batch, right? And the one where everyone has the opportunity to watch it episode after episode has far higher engagement through the series than the one that's dropped weekly, because people forget about it. Perhaps people move on to the next show. So that initial drop of a series has that impact. But at the same time, is that often normally means that somebody will binge through a series in a day or 2. So that's not going to take people across multiple subscription windows. So a weekly drop does that. It takes your subscriber across multiple subscription windows, makes them stay there for longer, reducing churn. I think one of the really interesting strategies that we're starting to see emerge is somewhere kind of in the middle of the 2, which is where you're seeing a kind of split season drop, right? So you're seeing 3 or 4 episodes, or maybe let's say it's an 8-parter. We're seeing the first 5 episodes dropped as a block, and then that engages the viewer, and then you're seeing, usually around a month later, the final 3 episodes drop. So that means that you're converting that subscriber across multiple subscription windows, and you're reducing that churn. But at the same time, you've got that first bank of episodes that can engage them initially. And I think what we're actually also seeing is that these sort of strategies are being utilized on seasons 2, 3, 4. We're not seeing them necessarily on season 1. And I think on season 1, there's a little bit more reluctance to do so, simply because the point is to engage that person in that content initially, to get them to watch it all the way through, become a fan of that show. And then once you've got them engaged, you're in season 2, they're much less likely to drop off. And then you can start playing around with the strategies that keep people engaged, stop them churning out, because they're ultimately, okay, the final 2 episodes are going to come out next month. Of course, I'm not going to drop my subscription.
Right. It would seem that as the various SVOD services have increasingly put ad tiers into their offers, that getting that engagement could be very important if you're using advertising as one of your revenue models. So the more that you're going to be using advertising as a revenue model, the more important it is to get that engagement, that usage up front. Like in a AVOD or a FAST service with no subscription, and you're not worried about keeping somebody hanging on for a while, it would seem that it's really important to think about releasing more upfront.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I'll obviously let everyone join in on that, but I think that the dial is shifting. We focus. I mean, our business mainly is focusing on the SVOD. So we're seeing, but what we're seeing is a shift from an SVOD model into a hybrid, right? So we're seeing people adding ad tiers, and that creates a really interesting shift in terms of the way that content specifically can drive value to those platforms. Because really it was around can you drive subscribers or can you reduce churn? That's ultimately, can you acquire or can you retain my subscribers? And you would see some of the biggest, most high-performing content on a platform be cancelled, perhaps, because, I mean, there's a bunch of examples where something has appeared in a publicly released top list, and that has then been cancelled. And the reason why I believe it's been cancelled is one part perhaps due to the engagement, but also perhaps due to the fact that it's engaging the heaviest consumers that are just watching it relentlessly, consumers that are never going to potentially churn, so they're not the churn risk. So I think that's a really key factor as well. So I think that once we start seeing that shift, into the AVOD model, into a hybrid model that brings in the AVOD side of things, then that might change slightly, because actually what they need is that viewership.
Right.
And some of the shifts that we've seen, account sharing, new models, changing fundamentally the way that people have their relationship with their subscribers, can drive down the average viewing. So that's going to become interesting to see how they navigate that, because whilst it might lead to an increase in the subscriber numbers, it also it decreases the viewing, and therefore there's less people watching your ads.
Yeah, I would just add, I agree, and I would just add 2 points. One is that content, as we all know, is still the king or queen, and it's what keeps people on the platform. And you have to keep bringing new content, or you have to have the resources to buy older catalogs and put them on your service. And as we're seeing the media, the big tech companies coming into the space more, and with what seems to be unlimited funds, it'll be interesting to see how the smaller streaming players are able to compete and prevent churn, because they don't have that big cash, pile of cash sitting in the background. Dan was talking about this morning how to borrow money now is very expensive. So how do these smaller streaming players prevent churn when they're competing against some companies that media is just one component of what they do, probably a smaller component compared to everything else that just is bringing tons of cash. And then the second thing is, I've been listening a lot recently that Wall Street is not necessarily looking at subscribers anymore. They're looking at time on platform, and exactly what you were saying about advertising. Because time on platform, necessarily, result is that means you're spending more time watching content. You're watching more ads. So it's going to be interesting to see how the industry evolves over the next 6 to 12 months. Everything's moving so fast now. So it'll be interesting to see where we are next year when we're back here.
Cool. Yeah.
Might add, if I may, the challenge with fast and AVOD as pure fast AVOD services is that nobody's going to put their first run content there. There's just not enough ad revenue associated with it. And so what they're finding themselves having to do is try and create a compelling ad-supported subscription model for that first run content in their otherwise subscription-based model. I wasn't allowed to call this when I was in employment, but I call it sad VOD for very obvious reasons. It's a horrible hobbling of a service, right? You want to say that this piece of content that I've created that is my flagship show is worth every penny of your subscription. And for many years, people have said, we agree. We shouldn't alter it in any way. We love that you've taken away that limitation of broadcast television, of breaking it into vignettes and interrupting it by providing me with an ad-free solution. So I think that the industry then finds itself looking at fast and AVOD in a different way, which is these are effectively barker channels, an opportunity to cover the cost of having those, and in some cases make money because the advertising is compelling. But you're always trying to drive your consumer somewhere else. And the beauty, hopefully, of FAST is that it removes one limitation of ad-supported television, which is you arrive in the middle of something that you weren't thinking to watch, you get hooked, but you can't start it from the beginning. FAST technology allows us to say, okay, you're in a digital environment. If you really do enjoy this and you want to start it, I can take you to an AVOD environment and you can start it whenever you want to and enjoy the whole show. So I'm hopeful that as an industry, each of those pieces adds up to a better consumer experience rather than to coin, or not to coin it as it's already been coined, but to use a phrase that's recent, in shitification. That is to say, compromise the service to a consumer because that's what they're just used to do and they'll pay to try and make it as good as possible.
And I think I would also add on the fast side, on the subscription side, you do have the luxury where you could have somebody who subscribes and then they forget about it and you're still getting that revenue every single month. On the fast side, we rely on people who are loyal and come back every day. So I think as a programmer on a fast channel, you need to really be thinking about your content library. Again, content being king. You got to have new stuff in there. And the platforms have gotten smarter about it with some of their requirements. They've said if you want to be on our platform, your library minimally needs to have around 200 hours, 25% monthly refresh rate. And that's really just to keep people who are coming to your channel, they're going to come back because they're not going to see the same stuff over and over and over again. At CMG, we're really lucky with our fast channels that because we have our live news component, in some cases, we're getting up to around 8 hours a day of live news content that's new every single day. So that's great for our retention because people are going to come back every day to watch the news. They're not going to see a ton of the same thing over and over again, because you are getting that new content several times per day. And that's really been, powerful for us in just seeing that the loyalty is there. And that's really critical for, that engagement is what drives, we need the viewership to make the money. If people don't come back and they don't watch, or they watch for 1 minute and then click, that's not meaningful. Whereas like somebody coming and average watch time being around an hour is huge.
Speaking of those people who forget they have a subscription and they keep paying, I think you call them sleepers, right? Is it better to disturb the sleepers and let let them know, hey, you haven't watched in a while, or do you just let them continue to forget or sleep? What's your experience there? Don't touch
Let them sleep.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, all subscription businesses are like gym memberships. You need a certain portion of your subscribers not to use it.
Good. Okay. And let's shift gears a bit and talk about distribution and using distributors versus going direct to consumers. What are the pros and cons there of that? And Matt, I know you have a lot of experience there with that.
Yeah, there's definitely pros and cons to both. And in some cases, as an organization, you may choose one or the other or both. At CMG, we have both options. But, on the direct to consumer owned and operated app side of things, one of the big advantages is more control over inventory, which is huge. Other advantages is you have more flexibility about how you're programming and things like that. You don't have as many requirements to worry about. But on the downside of that, number one being your development costs for these apps can be pretty significant, whether you're using your own in-house tech teams or you're going through a third-party, white labeled solution. You have to think about those costs. And also then, the acquisition cost of users. Right now in the CTV space, getting somebody to come to and download your app is very challenging. There's so much competition out there. So if you don't have a paid marketing budget to get people to download your app, it's pretty tough to get those downloads. So that would be a disadvantage. I would say on the third-party distribution side, a lot of these platforms have been around for many years now, and they have their active user base of millions and millions of monthly active users. So if you get your content there, the users are already there. It makes it a lot easier to get people to find your channel and stay engaged. Other, advantages is it's cheaper since you don't have to worry about those development costs. You do have to go through a third-party cloud playout solution like a Magi or Whirl, but that's still significantly less expensive than, developing the apps. Downside is that you're going to lose some of your inventory. In some cases, the platform may say that they're selling all the inventory and they're just going to give you back a rev share. It's definitely a disadvantage. And then also you have their requirements that you have to be thinking about. So if a platform says that they only want 2 minutes of ads and only 8 per hour, then you have to find a way to make that happen if that's not your standard, if you want to be on that platform. So, again, really pros and cons. And I think also just on that inventory side is where's your organization in terms of ad sales and direct sales and programmatic? If you don't have all that, a team for that, then yeah, go the third party route and let the platform who has all those resources do what they do best, sell the ads and give you back the rev share. But if you do have your own sales team and strong direct sales and programmatic stack and all that, you'll definitely see the advantage of having control of some of that inventory.
And you were, go ahead.
No,
Okay.
I would just add the difference in churn between an owned and operated and a partner service can be 100 to 150%, which means that, yes, you're getting an enormous footfall through that partner, just as the supermarket model alluded to, but you might, with that partner, be having to replace your entire audience twice a year or more. So, yes, enormous development costs, enormous in-house resource cost of running owned and operated services. But the return on that investment is vast if you can make it work for you. And there is no doubt that curation is the single largest churn mitigator there is. And you're never going to get that with a partner because they're trying to curate 40 brands. And you're lucky if you get an end cap to a shelving space. And I think from that perspective, you either acknowledge that your content and your experience is so valuable that curation is what's going to keep your churn at a low enough level to make money, candidly, or you're just saying, what I've got is only going to be so valuable, and so I stand a better chance of just getting in front of as many eyeballs as possible, even if those eyeballs have a very short, lifetime value.
I'll just add, because they're all great points, and just from my experience, it's something that people initially don't think about, especially the people who are doing the deals, who are selling your content. When I was back at Viacom, we would, the business dev folks were doing a great job selling our content. Digital was new. But one of the things we really wanted to get back was the data. Like, what is our consumers, what are they buying on these platforms, especially back then, and what are they consuming? And it was so relatively new that the focus on the business dev side was really just closing the deals. And then we would then come back and trying to figure out, well, how are we doing? Is our brand growing? Are we cannibalizing now? We just sold to Netflix. Is that cannibalizing from our linear experience? And that has evolved, thankfully. And in the last few years, we sat at the table and we worked with the business dev folks. We actually had a template. And we would say, it was like 2-3 pages, and we would say, they would include it in the first round of negotiations, and usually would come back with a lot of red lines. And then with the good partners, we'd get back data, and then we would see how people were consuming it. And it might not be at the first party level where we can see the actual person consuming it, but it'll give us aggregate numbers enough so we can see how well we were doing. So what I would take away from that is it's important to work with your business dev folks and strategic people who are making those deals to be at the table, so that way you can see how you're doing. And then secondly is building good partnerships with those people that are distributing it. So they want to maintain, your brand is important to them, because it should be, because your brand is going to enable more subscribers on that platform, and it's going to prevent churn as well. So everybody has skin in the game now. And if you do it right, they're going to invest in your content. They're going to invest. They're going to buy marketing. And we saw that with Peacock. They're amazing partners. And they help grow the brand as well. And it could work very well if done right and you have the right partnership.
Matt, you were mentioning that it's becoming increasingly difficult to get distribution, where it used to be the case that in the early days of FAST that it was pretty straightforward, and now it's getting difficult. So what's causing this? What are the ways to get distribution if you're trying to get it?
Yeah, it's definitely become more difficult as a distributor to get your content onto these FAST platforms. I think on the platform side, they've now realized that they maybe have too many channels, and they're really thinking about it much more strategically to limit that now there's too many channels and people are now just doing the same thing. Now they're scrolling and they're not watching. So they don't want to flood the EPGs. So I think part of that is they don't want to see that it's the same channel over and over and over again from a different partner. So part of it is like they've now set some of the requirements we talked about, where you need to have like the big content library, the refresh rate. The channel that you're bringing has to be something unique. If they already have 5 true crime channels, what's different about yours, right? So again, thinking about like your value proposition. At CMG, we've done our local distribution of the 8 local channels. We're now dipping our toes outside of news, but into a national FAST channel called the Spend Smart Stream, which is a personal finance related channel. It's to help our viewers save their money, grow their wealth, navigate finance with confidence, and live your best life. We've listened to our partners and the requirements and what they're looking for, and we've really used that in just helping determine a lot of the strategy behind how we're building the channel, how we're programming it. Everything like that. So those conversations have been, going on over the last month or so with all of our existing partners to try to get them excited to want to carry this new channel that we're bringing to the market. We're really excited about it, and hopefully, they're seeing the value in having a channel that they don't have, and hopefully that's going to be one of the big drivers in getting that channel distributed.
Cool. Let's shift to advertising, do a little bit of a deep dive on advertising here. So what are consumers' pain points around watching ads on streaming services? And it can be based on your own experiences as a viewer, but also, what are you seeing out there in terms of what needs to be fixed for advertising to work better?
Personally, I can tell you the ad pod size. I think if a 3-minute ad break, I'm finding another platform just went to ads, and I was sitting there with my wife. We were watching the show, and then it went into a 3-minute ad break. She goes, "I'm done. I don't want to watch it anymore." And then I haven't gone back to that platform. Where some other platforms I've been noticing they've been doing 60-second ad breaks. And that's just enough time for you to pull your phone out, start scrolling your phone, or maybe you watch the ad because it's interesting, and then you're back into the show. So that's just a personal experience, but I think that the size of the ad break needs to be taken into account.
irrelevant ads for you, another pain point. Another one is repetition. So what can be done around frequency capping or other ways, making ads really targeted in a way that might fulfill the promise of targeted advertising? What have you all seen there?
I think you're right that the promise of a digital ad environment that we know enough about you to advertise to you, the data is ahead of the buying power. And unfortunately, a lot of the limit rates have had to be released in the short term because the lack of inventory is forcing the hand. Which is to say, sorry, I'll unpack that a little bit. A lot of the content on these services, there's a required ad break minimum or an ad load minimum for rights. And so if you are at a point where you haven't been able to convince traditional advertisers that this is a real environment in which they should be spending their ad dollars, you have no choice but to run house ads or raise the caps. I think that's just a temporary challenge. I absolutely agree that the length of the ad pod is a critical factor. And we should, unlike traditional television, be able to be much more responsive to individual needs. I loved that in the early days of Hulu, they would give you a choice at the beginning. Do you want to watch a big ad pod at the beginning and no commercial interruption for the rest of the show? Or do you want it spaced out? We should be able to offer that, because if it's simply about the amount of ad interruption, sure, you can have a minimum number of breaks as long as you add up to the aggregate minute number. I do think, and we've certainly seen that in consumer behavior on mobile devices, it's perhaps more difficult to manage on lean-back devices, that to be able to specify whether this is an ad that you've enjoyed or you felt was relevant does help advertisers target you better, and that's better for both parties.
Go ahead. Sorry.
I think the only thing I would add is that I think sometimes the shift in the experience. So if the initial proposition is such, and you change that, then that can have an impact on churn. So it's understanding, how much risk you're willing to accept if you change the experience from an ad perspective. Look, some of these players now are starting to bring in ad tiers, but if you think about someone like a Spotify, it's not video, but they started with an ad. Everything was ads, and you had to then scale up to come out of it. And it's kind of heading in the opposite direction for most of the major video players, video streamers. So it's an interesting, from a churn perspective, it's how far are you willing to go in terms of changing that user experience, accepting the risk that comes with that, and then understanding the benefits that obviously that has when you've taken that risk. And I think that there are a couple of big players that have done that now and made those sorts of steps in completely different ways. And I'm assuming there are lots of people that are really interested to understand which of those two pretty polarizing methodologies in terms of moving into an ad tier are going to be the most effective.
Can I add one other? Yeah. You reminded me of a key factor too, which is that a lot of these environments have moved into ad-supported very quickly. And so their ability to bring stuff back into post and add dips to black has been limited. It's also expensive to do that. You have to retime everything. And so a lot of the ad experiences are made much worse by the fact that they're what we refer to in the industry as crash ads. They're soft segmented. I've just given you a time code, and whatever's going on in the content, I'm going to interrupt it. That's horrible, even if the ad is perfect for me. And so I do think as producers of content, we're going to go back into post-production a lot more and say, let's make this ad experience as good as we can, which is to say it's at a logical point in the content, it's on a frame of black, it has got, it's not going to interrupt the user experience.
Great point.
I think the last one that I'll add, I think, is a pain point for programmers, platforms, and viewers, and that's that there's too much slate that we see on a lot of these fast channels, and that's
the Zen moment or
Yes.
whatever on YouTube.
Yes, the "we'll be right back," and it just really, it's a worst case scenario for everybody, because for the viewer, it just gives you more of a reason possibly to change the channel, and then for the programmer, for the platform, now you're there, but we're not making any money off of you, and it's the worst case scenario. So it's really about, again, trying to figure out that everything is working from the technical perspective that the ad should be being served, that your programmatic is running, all that stuff, and really just kind of working together with your whether it's your technology partner like Amagi, the platform, your ad team, just really trying to reduce that slate as much as possible and make the user experience better for everyone.
I'll just add, DAI, people don't realize it, digital ad insertion, that's what you're mentioning, is very complicated. And having worked with it and having worked with partners on it, it's gotten much better, but it's very complicated. And it doesn't give you the same abilities that you would get if you were displaying ads from the broadcast center. Especially if you look at sports, one of the challenges of ad insertion is if you're in a live game and you want to do picture-in-picture where you have the game running and then having the ad running over here, it's very complicated because everybody's device now needs to be able to handle that extra power. The players need to be able to handle it. So yeah, I agree with you. I think it's getting better, but I think it's going to still take more time.
Okay, one final question, adapting this a little bit from what I said, but if you're a streaming service, what are the most important things that you should measure? Top of mind answers. What would be looking at, if you were running the service, what would you be like opening up the, from the prior day or whatever, and what would you be looking at?
I can start. Yeah, I mean, I think we obviously spend a lot of time looking at the data. I think what we're finding is that if we're talking obviously specifically around how we can reduce churn, understanding your audience is huge. Understanding your subscriber base is huge. And we've talked quite a little bit about cohorts. And I do genuinely think that that's right. And I think that frequency is massive. So understanding how often people are actually engaging with your platform. So we can see in our data that we have, groups of people that will watch 1 day a week, and they'll watch 7 hours in that week. Or you might have someone that watches 7 days a week and they watch 1 hour in those days. And the thought process really is that the person that's watching 1 hour a day is less likely to be a churn. So it's understanding the cohorts that are less likely to churn, creating those segmentations, and understanding what it is that you're doing, whether it's content, whether it's strategy, that is keeping those people in. Because you're going to always have a section of your audience that you need to service, but they're less likely to be a concern for you in the churn. So creating those cohorts, understanding it, and that's a lot of what we do. We do a lot of breaking down our audience, breaking down our panels, understanding who are the most, who are the lightest viewers, who are the most likely to churn, overlaying demographic data, understanding who they are, but also understanding what they watch, what drives them back in, and utilizing that data. And that's to me, is one of the keys.
Got it. How about for you?
Yeah, I think on the fast channel side, it's that most important metric that a platform or a programmer would really want to be seeing is that hours watched or watch time per user, something like that. Because again, as we've been talking about on this side of it, is like we make our money off of you sitting there and watching a lot of content. And if you're a channel that has a low average watch time per viewer, even if you're getting a lot of viewers, that's going to be less significant than a channel that maybe has a smaller audience, but they're more engaged and they're watching more content. And I think as these fast platforms are talking about having too many channels, it's looking at that time watched and the consumption rates and kind of figuring out what are people not spending their time on, and are these channels that are worth having if there's new channels out there that may have an opportunity to drive the needle. So I think that engagement rate, that watch time, is really the most critical thing to be thinking about.
Cool.
Yeah, I'll take a little different tact on this. So a couple years ago, we were interested in why people were churning. So we would send people, and I was one of them. I had a great opportunity to go to Ohio to meet our fans. And we went to a Raw event and went to a SmackDown event. And before the event, we surveyed them. We said, did you churn? And then we asked them why, a lot of questions. So just doing that, you really got to meet the people. And you got to understand them. You got to hear their stories. And obviously, we brought that back and put into nice spreadsheets. But it took us out of our office, out of our desk, and talked to our subscribers. And I can't underestimate what we learned from that, but also how we all felt in our experiences, and understand how passionate they were about our product, and listening to their stories, understand what we could do better to provide them to help prevent churn in the future. So I would don't be afraid to talk to your subscribers.
So I'll reiterate and reinforce what Matt was saying. What you need to measure is different for each cohort. And I would say that there's a key phase in any customer journey. It's the T1 through 7, and it's the P1 through 30. So trial day 1 through 7, and then the day they paid through 30. We were saying earlier, the drop of a lot of shows at this point, if it's an 8-episode show, you try and cover 6 weeks. There's the week of trial, the 4 weeks of your first month, and then you're hoping somebody will pay one more time. And if you can get that as your minimum lifetime value out of a customer, you're probably doing well. But what that means is that what we're analyzing day 1, T1, T2, T3, T4 is different from P3, P4, P5. And frankly, once you're into P60, you're a wholly different animal. And what we measure then is very different. So I think it's the level of granularity that perhaps isn't apparent to the wider world, but our teams are looking at every single day of those early engagements in a slightly different way. What I'm interested in there is you can usually tell by day 3 of a trial whether your customer's going to stay. So because you know that, what could you do on day 4, 5, and 6 that might alter their buying decision? Lots of things that you can do. One is about suggesting, based on what they have done, what else they might do before they make that decision. The other is potentially to say, I don't want that pay decision to be binary. For whatever the price point your service is, it's going to be a decision. Do I opt in? Do I opt out? Are there any ways within our technologies that we could say, maybe there's a half subscription? Maybe there's metered usage. Maybe there are other ways of looking at how you're buying that help you make a more informed decision.
Cool. Great. Well, we're out of time, so please join me in thanking our panelists.